Hey guys, welcome back to a new video. So in this video we are going to write a functionality that we can pick an image in our image pick fragment, and then we want to test if that actually works. So if we tap on an image, if we are navigated back to our add shopping item fragment, and also if the corresponding URL of that image is set in the view model correctly. I want to start to implement the image adapter, so just our Recyclerview adapter that displays the single images in a square format in our image pick fragment. For that I will create a new package here in our root package, so I will call that package adapters, because we will have several adapters here in this project. In this package we will create a new Kotlin file or class which will be called image adapter, and we select class here. So does this image adapter need any parameters in the constructor? Yes, it does. We need an instance of our glide, so our image loading library, and we will simply use Dagger here to inject that. We actually don't have a provides function for that yet, so let's actually do that first. We want to go to our DI package, app module, and let's go right here and create that glide instance so we can just inject it everywhere in our project. We want to make that a singleton and annotate it with @provides, just as all the other functions here as well. So function provide glide instance, that will take the application context, which is of type context, and we set that equal to glide.width, where we will pass our context, dot set default request options, because we want to set a placeholder image and also an error image. So in case something runs wrong with the loading, then we want to just assign a default image for that. And in here we can create a new request options object, on which we will call that placeholder r.drawable.ic. Need to import R, I think. Yes, we do. IC image, I call it. So just a blank image. And also for the error resource here, r.drawable.ic image. Okay, then we can go back to our image adapter file here and inject this glide instance we just created. So glide, which is of type request manager, that is the type we need here. And inside of this image adapter class, we first create our view holder for that. So class image view holder, which inherits from Recyclerview.viewHolder, which takes an item view that we also need to create here. Item view is a view, and then we can let this image adapter class inherit from Recyclerview.adapter, in which we will pass our image view holder and call the constructor on that one. And then we can implement all of our functions for the Recyclerview by pressing Ctrl and I. Select all of that. Okay, and there we go. Let's remove those to-do statements and start with onCreateViewHolder. Or let's actually not start with that. Instead, start with our list differ. So we will just use a list differ here for performance reasons. And also I just realized we need to make this a private val here, so we have access to that in our class. And that list differ needs a differ callback. So make that a private val diff callback, which is equal to object colon differ call diffutil dot item callback of type string, because we just want to compare URLs, so strings. And in that differ callback we need to implement those two functions. I think you already know these. And our item's the same. We'll just return if old item is equal to new item, and we will use the same for our contents the same. So we also return old item is equal to new item. Then we have to create the actual list differ. So private val differ is equal to a new async list differ, in which we will pass our adapter first, so this, and our differ callback as a second parameter. And then we can create a get and set function for that list differ, so we actually have access to its list from the outside. So var images, which is a list of strings, so a list of the URLs here, and the get function will return our differ, not differ callback, or differ dot current list. And in the set function, so set value, we will set that to differ dot submit list and pass the value here. Then in our onCreateViewHolder function, I'll make a little space, we want to return an image view holder of type, so actually just a view here, which we can get with the layout inflator. So layout inflator dot from parent dot context and call dot inflate on that. We want to inflate r dot, need to import r here, r dot layout dot item image. We want to assign parent as the view group, and we don't want to attach that to the root layout. And that's already it for our onCreateViewHolder function. Let's next do the getItemCount function, because that is so simple. We just want to return images, so our list dot size. And in our onBindViewHolder function, we first want to get a reference to the current URL of that item. So val URL is equal to images at the index of position. And then we can use our holder.itemView.apply. And now we want to load the image from that URL into our image view of that corresponding item by using glide. So our glide instance dot load our URL dot into our IV shopping image from item image.xml. So import that. And I also want to create an on-item click listener in here, so we can very easily set that from the outside to just respond to item clicks in our Recyclerview. So let's actually do that right here. That will be a private var on-item click listener, which is of type, and that is a lambda function that takes a string. So we have access to that URL we clicked on from the outside, and it returns a unit. And this whole lambda function is nullable, and we also set it to null initially. And then I will create a function here, set on item click listener, which will take the listener as a parameter, which is also of type string to unit. And in here, we're just going to set on item click listener to the listener we passed as a parameter. And in our holder.itemView.apply here, we can now set an on click listener to our actual image view, our image view. So set on click listener here. And when we click on this image, we want to call our custom on item click listener. So we want to use on item click listener, make a null check, give that a name click, and just call this function click with the current URL. So with the URL we clicked on. Next, we want to create a Fragment Factory to be able to use constructor injection in our fragments. And that is actually the preferred way when it comes to testing, that we inject dependencies in the constructor and not as just field injection, because that makes it more flexible basically, because we can just create fragments and pass different dependencies in the constructor, and we don't just need to create them and then set the dependencies afterwards. That is just a little bit more convenient. And for that, because we cannot just do that by default with that fragment constructor, we need to create a Fragment Factory. That is very similar to view model factories, that we also need to do the same. So what we will do is we will go to our UI package and create a new Kotlin file or class called, I don't know how we call that. That is a factory for all of our fragments. So let's just call it shopping fragment factory and select class here, which will inherit from Fragment Factory. And here in this shopping Fragment Factory, we can now inject all the dependencies we want to have in our fragments. So import inject. And for now, that is only our image adapter. Actually, private val image adapter. Then we want to override instantiate. So when that fragment is actually instantiated, and because we want one fragment factory for all of our fragments, we will use a when expression here. So return when. Depending on the class name here of the fragment, we want to just create a different fragment. So when class name, and for now we only have a single class name here, which is our image pic fragment class.java.name. In that case, we just want to create an image pic fragment with, we don't even have parameters yet in that image pic fragment. So let's actually change that, open up our image pic fragment and inject our image adapter here in the constructor, import inject, and just use a private val image adapter, which is of type image adapter. And in our shopping fragment factory, we then need to pass that image adapter that we injected here. And we also need an else branch here. So else, we just want to return this super implementation here, the super call of this function. We can remove this return, and that is already it. Now the last thing we need to do before we can write our actual test cases is in our image pic fragment just to set that on item click listener to our image adapter, and also to set up our Recyclerview, of course. So image adapter dot set on item click listener, and in here we get access to that URL we clicked on, and we just want to use our Nav Controller to pop the backstack. So we want to go back from our image pic fragment to our add shopping item fragment, and we also want to set the URL of our view model to this URL we clicked on, so to this image URL actually. ViewModel.current image URL, not this one, actually set current image URL to change the value of that, and here we just pass it. And we also want to set up our Recyclerview, so let's create a function very quick for that. Private function setup Recyclerview, in which we will just use RV images, that is our Recyclerview, .apply, and we first want to set the adapter of that Recyclerview to our image adapter, and we want to set the layout manager to a grid layout manager, so that we have all our images as a grid. That takes the context, where we can just pass require context, and we need to pass the span count, so how many columns we want to have here. For that, I will create a constant called grid span count, which we will create in our constants file in our other package. So let's just do that right here. Const val grid span count, and set that to 4 or to whatever you like. And here we need to import that. And then we can call that function here, set up Recyclerview, and now we are ready to write our actual test case that if we click on an item in that Recyclerview, if we are then navigated back to our add shopping item fragment, and also if the current image URL in our view model is set to the corresponding URL we clicked on. So let's right click on this image pic fragment, generate a new test class here. And the name is fine, also JUnit4. We click on OK. Make that in Android test, of course. And now we just need the normal annotations here we usually have in our test classes. First of all, hilt Android test, because we want to inject dependencies into this test class. Then this will be a medium test, so an integration test. And also we want to annotate that with add experimental coroutines API. And in the class body, we first want to declare our hilt rule for testing, also nothing new here. So var hilt rule is equal to hilt Android rule, and pass this as a parameter. And in our before function setup, we just inject the dependencies using that hilt rule. So hilt rule dot inject. And well, what do we actually want to inject here? We want to inject the fragment factory we created, because we want to now create an image pick fragment in a container, and that of course needs that factory to be able to correctly create that fragment, because it needs constructor parameters. So late init var fragment factory, which is of type fragment factory, and we simply annotate that with add inject. And now we can create our actual test case down here. So that will be, a test annotated function, of course, called function click image underscore pop backstack and set image URL. So that is actually what we expect. So we click on that image and we expect that we pop the backstack, and we also set the corresponding image URL in the view model of our image pick fragment. So first of all, that is nothing new. We need to mark our nav controller so that we can test the actual navigation. We actually already tested that with the pop backstack function. So we will just create a nav controller here. Well, nav controller is equal to mock, import that, a mock of type nav controller class.java. And then we can launch our fragment in hilt container, and that will be an image pick fragment. And this time this takes a fragment factory here, because we want to pass our fragment factory we injected above. And in here we also just want to use navigation dot set view nav controller. We want to pass Recyclerview, and we want to just pass our nav controller that we mocked as a nav controller for this image pick fragment here. Okay, so for now that was nothing different, but we actually don't want to just simulate a click on a floating action button as we did that already. Instead, we want to simulate a click on an item of a Recyclerview. And that is a little bit difficult, or actually not difficult, but different than what we did before. And we need one more dependency for that, so that actually Espresso, our UI testing library, supports clicks on Recyclerview items. So we want to go to our build.gradle file, and down here in our instrumented unit tests, we want to paste this dependency. You can find that in my GitHub repository. A link is in this video's description. We want to sync Gradle, close our build.gradle file, and that is not the file I want to be in. Image pick fragment test, and now we have access to that function that just simulates that click on our Recyclerview. So down here we now want to click on an item using onView again. So first we need to reference the view we want to click on, which is in this case just our Recyclerview, so with ID. That's also nothing new here. Pass r.id, also import r here, so many imports, r.id.rvimages dot perform, so also the same, we want to perform a view action, but this time this view action needs to be Recyclerview actions dot action on item at position actually. And here we need to pass the type of view holder we have in our Recyclerview, which is of type image view holder. And here in this function action on item at position, we need to pass the position of the item we want to click on. So we just want to click on the very first item, so we pass the index 0, and the view action we want to perform. So what do we actually want to do? Well, we want to do a click. So we simply pass click here and import that. But just doing that would be a little bit too easy. So on the one hand, we have the problem that our Recyclerview is currently empty. So because we just launched a new fragment here in a container, this Recyclerview doesn't contain any items. And we also don't have any, we don't want to make any requests to our PixabayAPI to actually show something in that Recyclerview. because we don't want to make any API requests in our test cases. So what we need to do is we just need to manually insert one item in that recycler view that doesn't need to have a valid URL, but it just needs to have a value for that URL that we then can check afterwards if that value is actually the same as the value that comes from our view model. Okay, so let's actually create that up here. Val image URL is equal to, just pass anything, I'll just name it test here. And in this launch fragment in init container function, we have access to our image pick fragment. So we want to use the image adapter, which is private, I just see. So we need to make that public. Let's go to our image pick fragment and make this not a private val here actually, instead a public val, so we can access it in our test case like this. And we want to set images, so the list of that image adapter, to a new list of image URL. So just a single item which represents that image URL here. And now one more thing we should do here is we should disable the animations in our emulator, because Espresso will of course simulate that click on a Recyclerview item, and we also have diffutil, which will add animations to our Recyclerview by default, and animations can just lead to flaky tests, so tests that sometimes fail and sometimes don't, because they just interfere with Espresso, because Espresso is very fast, and of course if there is an animation that just takes a little bit of time, then this could lead to unpredictable results here. And to actually disable the animations, on the one hand we could go to our developer options in the emulator, but because we would need to search a little for that, we want to make that from the command line using ADB. So open your Android Studio terminal here, and I will just type 3 commands here. On the one hand, ADB shell settings, put global, window animation underscore scale, and set that to 0. So we just disable that. Press enter, then ADB server needs to restart. I don't actually know why it always needs to do that. Anyways, then we can press the up arrow, change window animation scale to transition animation scale, and also set that to 0. Press enter, let ADB restart again, and then press the up arrow again. And one last time we want to do the same for animator underscore duration underscore scale, and press enter again. Okay, there we go. So that just disabled the animations in our emulator. And then I will minimize that. And what we now want to do is, after we clicked on that Recyclerview item at position 0, we now want to verify, of course, that we pop the backstack. So verify using Mockito here. We want to verify that from our nav controller, the pop backstack function was called. And well, that now tests if the navigation works fine, so if we actually pop the backstack after clicking an item, but this doesn't test if the actual image URL is also set to our view model accordingly. And to test that, we need to create a test view model here. So test view model, which we can just use a new shopping view model for. So shopping view model, and here we want to pass our fake shopping repository, which we don't have yet in our Android test repository. So let's quickly go to our project hierarchy in the test directory, repositories, and use that fake shopping repository, copy it over to, or actually let's just copy this whole package over to our Android test directory and paste that here. And we want to rename this fake shopping repository, pressing Shift and F6, to fake shopping repository Android test. So just that these two differ here. And in our image pick fragment test, we can then hopefully create that fake shopping repository Android test, which doesn't take any parameters here. And in our block here, where we have access to our image pick fragment, we can set the view model of our image pick fragment to our test view model, so just to override that. And then on the very bottom, after we pop the backstack, we want to assert that Actually, I want to import that, not from JUnit here, remove this import again, and instead import that from our truth library here. Assert that we want to assert that our test view model dot current image URL, so our live data, dot get or await value, if that is equal to the image URL we created above. So just as a little quick recap, first we create a mock object of our nav controller, so just that we can verify here in the bottom that the pop backstack function was called on that. And we create this image URL, just a random string for testing. It doesn't matter if this is a real URL or not. And a test shopping view model here to pass that to our actual image pick fragment, so we can then later assert that actually the current image URL of that test view model is equal to the image URL we created above here. And with this on view here, we just use Espresso, our UI testing library, to perform or to simulate a click on a Recyclerview item at a position and at the position of 0. So we want to just click on that. Okay, and we also need to add this instant task executor rule up here because we test live data. We also should annotate this hilt rule actually with add get rule. You probably already wondered why I didn't add that before. I just forgot about that. And we will also have a get rule called var instant task executor rule up here, which is of type instant task executor rule. And the rest should be fine. I think this should be a shopping fragment factory. That's how we call it, right? Yeah, because otherwise I think Hilt will complain. But the rest should be fine. So let's actually run our test case and hopefully that works. Okay, let's see. And the test case succeeds, so everything is working as expected. So if you like this video, then hit the like button, comment below what you think about this, and also if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, then quickly make sure to do that. Click on the subscribe button and don't miss Android content every second day. I wish everybody of you an awesome day and see you in the next video. Bye bye.